An insignificant rock amidst a galactic backdrop. Earth, yet another terrestrial planet in an ocean of planets. But for prying eyes, this unique rock is an immediate standout. Even from afar, through the study of the light the planet reflects off its host star, an alien intelligence could deduce the spectral signature of gases produced by life. An excursion is immediately ordered, and thousands of years later, the first of many visitors finally arrive. The journey is long, but thousands of years matter little to a species so advanced that lifespans no longer have a natural end. The planet is inhabited, not just by the expected life, but by something unexpected, an upright descendant of the great apes. It's intelligent, showing signs of advanced tool use, metalworking, and community, all hinting at its potential to one day be a great civilization. But its morality is primitive, unevolved. It must be taught, and taught in the language that such primitive species only understand: superstition. It's easy enough to inspire awe in creatures who haven't even figured out advanced mathematics. Advanced technologies are able to project light and sound over great distances, convincing the inhabitants of Earth that these are truly godlike entities, supernatural beings of cosmic power. The humans struggle to make sense of what they're seeing, yet lack the language to describe such things as artificial lighting, electricity, or aircraft. These are all technologies that aren't even a seed in mankind's brain yet, and thus there is no concept and no word to describe them. The humans are given an example to follow, guidelines along which their morality will evolve. It's a simple matter of overwhelming their primitive brains with awe-inspiring images and displays to convince them of a higher power, and to create enough fear and respect that they should listen to it. Commandments are given, basic rules of civilization upon which mankind can evolve and use as a foundation. But they're primitive and require fear at times as motivation. A second entity is thus created, one diametrically opposed to, but not an equal of, the benevolent God, which has been given to the humans. They create many names for this negative, evil entity. One of his earliest is Beelzebul, but he will eventually be known as Satan or Lucifer. Its purpose is simple: show mankind the consequences of sinning, of living an evil life. These sins, though seemingly largely inconsequential when observed with a single human life, can rapidly multiply to bring about unimaginable calamities as mankind's power over technology grows. And the visitors know the consequences of a real evil very well. The galaxy is a graveyard of shattered civilizations that destroyed themselves or one another with apocalyptic technologies. Mankind will be different. They will be given both a god to shepherd them to a more perfect morality and a demon to nip at their heels when they should falter and fall behind. The preceding is the theory behind many who believe that human religion was either influenced or outright created by an intelligent alien species who have been pulling the strings from behind the scenes since the dawn of our species. But is there any real proof of this? And what happens if it turns out to be true after all? Today we're going to be looking at the Jewish and Christian faiths, though there are similar parallels in most human religions. The authors of the Holy Text, used by both the Jews and Christians, utilized a lot of ambiguous language to describe experiences with God and angels that, in modern hindsight, could be descriptive of technological events. While many religious people claim to, quote, experience God in their lives, very few have ever claimed they saw a physical appearance. Known as theophany, this is an actual physical appearance of the living God to an individual or group of people, as opposed to a vision, an image or a sound, or other types of appearances. God is described as providing to people throughout the Old and New Testaments. What is curious about biblical theophanies is that throughout God's appearances to the faithful in the Old Testament, not a single witness ever saw God's actual face. There are numerous instances of prophets having face-to-face conversations with God, and yet we know that this was likely just a figure of speech used by the original authors to describe the event. In Exodus 33:20, God tells Moses that seeing God's face is physically impossible, as it would immediately kill any mortal who looked directly upon him. In this chapter, Moses is speaking with God about the mission that he's been tasked with. Moses is to lead the Jewish people into dangerous territory on the way to the Promised Land. It's a journey that'll prove full of tests of faith, physical dangers, and struggles to keep the wayward believers on track. Not least of Moses' concerns is the vulnerability of the largely unarmed Jews, and his ability to continue to reign in his rebellious group will become increasingly worrying as their journey becomes ever more difficult. In Moses' mind, If bandits and raiders don't kill or enslave them, or if they don't starve to death in the desert, then surely the Jews will pull themselves apart and refuse to continue listening to Moses. He needs a guarantee, not just for the people but for himself. He wants God to go with them physically, and thus dispel both the people's and his own personal fears. But God has another plan. He will instead send his presence along with the people, an invisible guiding force. For Moses, this isn't good enough. He insists that nobody will know God is with them unless God physically traveled alongside them. Again, Moses' fears are on full display. Yet rather than get angry, God understands Moses' fear and reassures him again, but Moses pushes the issue yet again, asking for God to, quote, show him his glory, or in plain speak, to physically appear. God once more reassures Moses that his presence will travel with them, and warns him at last that physically looking upon the face of God would prove fatal. He even assures Moses that he will have the physical assurance he seeks. To a degree, God himself will cover Moses' sight as he passes by him, but then allow him to gaze upon his back as he moves ahead. God thus appeared to humans throughout the Bible in a variety of ways. To the traveling Jews, he appeared to them as a pillar of clouds during the daytime, guiding them forward, and at night as a column of fire that lit their way. Earlier, he had appeared as a burning bush to Moses, who was confused at first until he was commanded to remove his sandals and not approach closer, as he was now standing on holy ground. When God told Moses who he was, God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, Moses hid his face out of fear of gazing upon God. To others, God manifested in other ways. To Elijah, he was a whisper, and to King Solomon, he appeared in his dreams. Though we're not given a physical description, but perhaps the most direct physical encounter with God occurred to Jacob. In his account, Jacob was fleeing from his brother after having deceived him, and he sent his wives, servants, and sons away and across a river. Left on the other bank alone, Jacob is suddenly accosted by another traveler, and the two begin to wrestle. The wrestling match lasts all night, with Jacob refusing to give up. Eventually, Jacob realizes he's dealing with some divine figure of some sort, though he's unsure of exactly who or what it is. The man tells Jacob to give up, as the sun is now rising, but Jacob refuses, saying he will not concede until the figure blesses him. God does indeed bless Jacob, changing his name to Israel, and prompting Jacob to ask who this strange man is. Deep down inside, though, Jacob must have known and was simply seeking validation, as later he called the place Peniel, the place where he wrestled with God face to face. And yet God spared his life. And then there's the most common way in which God appears to the people throughout the scriptures. While there are many encounters with angels noted, there is one specific angel that is singled out by title where no other angels are. This angel is known as the Angel of the Lord. This unique distinction hints strongly that this is either a theosophany or a Christophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of the Christ, as while other angels are named, none of them have a unique honor. Could these have been merely the arrival and appearances of a supreme alien intelligence, a force that for all intents and purposes is so advanced and in complete control that it might as well be God for primitive humanity? Having a precondition of humanity not being able to see its God face to face would be a strange rule for an alien. If the intent is to inspire a sense of awe at the power of this artificial God, then a simple demonstration of advanced technology should be enough. Within Christian and Jewish theology, though, God's face is often described as shining upon people or places, indicative of its holiness. Thus, it's believed that God is simply too holy to look at directly unless he disguises himself and creates a filter between humanity and himself. After all, even the most moral of people fall short of the perfect holiness of God, a holiness that by its very nature demands punishment for sin. Because without punishing sin, then holiness cannot be, in fact, holy. In Christian theology, Jesus' atoning death was the bridge between God's perfect holiness and imperfect humanity. Thus, the hidden face of God makes sense from a theological perspective, but not so much from the proposition of a counterfeit alien God. Though naturally, it can't be ruled out. It's simply a very strange detail to create into a mythology when any number of other displays of superiority and goodness would have done. The appearance of a God as a man to Jacob, though, is well within the bounds of what an intelligent alien race might do in order to better communicate with primitive humanity. What better way to get your clear intentions across than to interact directly with your subjects in a form that they would know and understand best? Many scientists today likely wish that they could communicate with ants or birds or other topics of research in their own form to gain unique insights. Yet, for alien scientists, such a feat should be relatively simple. A genetic sample would be enough to create an artificial man, and as there is little difference between an organic brain and a computer, creating a biological drone should be simple for a sufficiently advanced species. After all, the method of transmitting and storing information is largely the same, it's only the medium that's different. Such human drones would be extremely useful for an alien intelligence wishing to guide humanity from behind the scenes. And we may have more supporting evidence from the Bible itself. In Hebrews 13:2, either Paul or an unknown author warn early Christians to show hospitality to all strangers, for without knowing it, some humans had shown hospitality to angels in their midst. Naturally, this also means that some people could have shown far more negative sides of themselves to those same angels. Could these human-shaped angels be nothing more than biological drones for an alien intelligence keeping tabs on its cultural project? Then there is the appearance of God as a burning bush, an event which, with sufficient preparation, even our modern-day technology could easily fake on an unsuspecting victim. The appearance of God to the Jews as they left Egypt is more interesting though. Here once again God appears to them as a pillar of clouds by day and a column of fire at night to lead the way. These two depictions are interesting because they're actually very similar to what some modern UAP witnesses have described. In Alaska, in 1987, witnesses across western Alaska spotted a large UFO moving across the sky, which seemed to generate a cloud of some sort that eventually enveloped it. The UFO would remain almost completely covered by this cloud, even as it sped along in the sky, with the weather on the night in question being clear and cloudless. Also in Alaska, but at another location, witnesses have described seeing UFOs that changed their shape in strange ways and would generate cloud cover out of thin air. In one encounter, a pilot spotted a strange object that first appeared as a massive orb, and then seemed to take on a strange lasso shape. The object then took on a more traditional saucer shape, but created a massive cloud cover around itself in a matter of seconds. When considering the language of ancient scripture, it's important to remember that these early authors lacked the breadth of vocabulary to describe things that we enjoy today. Consider an object like a flashlight, something you can easily describe because it's part of everyday life. Yet the ancients would have no comparison for an object that could emit a beam of light in one direction, and no words for flashlight, electricity, batteries, or even light bulb. So could the ancient authors have been describing not an actual column of clouds, but rather a similar phenomenon as photographed in the prior images? Without a concept of even an airplane, could ancient writers have been describing a UFO generating its own clouds with the only language that they had for the phenomenon, a column of clouds in the sky? The same goes for the pillar of fire in the sky. Again, the ancients would have had no concept of artificial lighting. The only type of light that they understood came from either lightning in the night sky, the sun, the moon, stars, or fire. How would they then describe a UFO lit up in multiple different lights, or perhaps just a simple spotlight shooting up at the sky or down from above? Consider the types of spotlights that we see all the time today, everywhere from concerts to award shows or even car dealerships. If an ancient person saw this, they might be tempted in the only way they know to describe it, a column of ghostly fire in the sky. Then there's no good reason to think that Moses and the people accompanying him weren't just seeing a display of advanced technology rather than a miraculous event. Next, we have the famous whisper of Elijah. In this story, Elijah is fleeing for his life after embarrassing the prophets of Baal and embarrassing the queen of Israel, Jezebel. This is a story worth looking into, though, as it details a very curious event not repeated anywhere else in the Bible. In this story, Elijah has a face-off with Ahab, the king of Israel. Ahab and his wife Jezebel had led the Jewish people away from worshiping God toward the worship of Baal. Jezebel herself had become a patron of the prophets of Baal and invited them into the land personally. Elijah then tells Ahab that they will have a God contest to once and for all decide who the people of Israel should worship, God or the impostor Baal. Ahab agrees to the challenge and summons the 450 prophets of Baal to Mount Carmel. The people of Israel come from all around to see the equivalent of an ancient Super Bowl between deities. Elijah then addresses the people and asks them how long they will waver between choosing to worship God or to worship Baal. The people, however, say nothing. Thus, Elijah lays out the challenge. He calls for 2 bulls and allows the Baal prophets to choose one for themselves. The bulls are to be a burned sacrifice and laid out on a pile of wood. But Elijah tells the prophets not to light the wood on fire. Instead, he issues this challenge: "Call on your God and I'll call on mine, and whichever God answers with fire to light the wood is the real God." The people agree and the contest is on, From morning to noon, the prophets of Baal call upon him to light the wood on fire, dancing around the sacrifice. However, there is no response, and Elijah even taunts them, telling them that surely Baal must be too busy to answer them. However, this is a polite translation, as in the original text, Elijah actually says something to the extent that Baal cannot answer because he's on the toilet. All day long, the Baal prophets call out until it starts to grow dark, and they become desperate. They even slashed and stabbed each other with spears and swords to spill their own blood, as was their custom. Yet, with night upon them and the time for the sacrifice past, the bull remained unscorched. Now Elijah orders the people to pour 3 jugs of water on the altar that he has built for his own sacrifice. And when the wood is completely soaked, he then calls out to God, asking that he reveal himself so the people will turn their hearts back to him. Immediately, a beam of white-hot flame falls upon the altar from the sky, incinerating the sacrificed bull and wood, even melting the stones the altar was built of. Was this an incredible display of God's power, or could it have been nothing more than alien technology? There are, in fact, already multiple lines of research into weapons powerful enough to cause a similar effect. The key is that the event is described as, quote, fire from the Lord, and fire powerful enough to melt stone, possibly even evaporated. In many ways, this is incredibly descriptive of what we would know today as a directed energy weapon. And indeed, the US military, along with a few others, employ lasers capable of disabling or destroying small vehicles, drones, and boats. In the early 2000s, the US even employed a flying laser capable of destroying ballistic missiles from hundreds of miles away, though the project proved too expensive and impractical to be adopted. Today's energy weapons are far too weak to do something as impressive as immediately melt or evaporate stone, but for a species capable of accessing the levels of energy required to traverse the galaxy, this would be an easy feat. And the displays of power don't end there, because shortly after, Elijah must flee a now vengeful Jezebel who seeks to kill him for the embarrassment. Elijah ends up taking refuge in the mountains, and completely disheartened, he actually asks God to take his life. Elijah takes a nap and is awakened once by an angel who had brought him food, and the second time by God himself in the form of an angel who had once brought him more food. 40 days later, a discouraged Elijah is once more in the mountains, and God once more appears to him. Elijah is discouraged that his preaching has had little effect on turning the hearts of the people away from Baal, and to encourage him, God orders Elijah to stand at the mouth of his cave and observe as he is about to pass by. There is a sudden massive windstorm and strong earthquake, powerful enough to shatter the cliff sides around him, and yet God was not in the storm. Next came a fire that swept across the mountain, but once more God was not in the fire. But then came a gentle whisper, and Elijah knew that this was God. Or was it? In Jewish and Christian tradition, Elijah's encounter is a beloved representation of the truth of God and his nature. The earthquake and the fire are powerful and terrifying, overwhelming forces of nature. Yet God was not in those vulgar displays of power. God was in a simple whisper, a whisper which by itself held enough power to propel Elijah out of his suicidal depression and go on to change the history of Israel, the same whisper that inspired countless other biblical heroes to do great deeds. But all of these phenomena could have also been faked. In 2016, Oklahoma felt its most powerful earthquake in the state's history. The 5.6 magnitude quake struck near Pawnee, and it's believed to be linked to fracking activity. The injection of fluids under high pressure into the Earth's crust forces gas deposits to the surface and makes them easier to extract. However, it's been known for a long time that it can also create shifts in the Earth, and sometimes at large magnitudes. Were aliens fracking for oil under Elijah's feet? Likely not, but there's another hint in the text. Elijah describes a great rushing wind that preceded the shattering of the rocks around him, then followed by fire. There's no indication of the timing of these events. They may have been separated by many minutes or even hours, or perhaps occurred in quick succession. If it's the latter, then what Elijah experienced could be explained away by something as simple as a meteor impact. A large enough object impacting the Earth close enough to Elijah could produce massive wind gusts, shake the land, and then ignite a fire that quickly spreads. A simple mass driver type of weapon somewhere in orbit would be sufficient for the task, and Elijah may have been witness to the first ever real-world use of a helldiver stratagem. The whisper that Elijah heard may also be explained by technology. There is, of course, the simple matter of utilizing hidden devices to project audio, but it's possible to create audible effects over long distances using nothing but lasers. Researchers in the US have successfully tested a device capable of using lasers to create audio over long distances, known as optoacoustic transduction. Carefully and precisely modulated bursts of laser energy create formations of plasma which can be made to produce audible effects. So was Elijah and other biblical figures simply seeing and experiencing advanced alien technology? Frightfully, we may never know the answer. To Christians and Jews, God is ultimately described as an experiential phenomenon, meaning that God is something you can ultimately only experience, not truly prove. And yet, as Arthur C. Clarke once famously remarked, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Now go check out Was Jesus Actually Resurrected? Or click this other video instead.